We are doing things a little bit differently this week in that our primary source reading is not a reading. Our primary source reading is a set of visuals, for reasons that we will talk about in a minute, related to the Minoans. And so what I want you to do when you're engaged in your online discussion is to pay attention to the visuals themselves. There is text available with the images that are posted that is modern commentary that is designed to direct your attention to certain features of each of these artifacts. But this is any conclusions and speculations there are up to the author of that text. I'm much more interested in how you respond to these images, what you think is plausible, what you think might be different kinds of explanations, because what we have here is a story that's being told without the benefit of words, a story that is familiar to the people that would have received it 3,000 years ago, but not to us. So we'll get involved in that a little bit more in the online discussion. There's also a quiz as usual, and we will talk more about the research essay next week. I still have a couple of people that haven't signed up for a responses write-up, so please make sure you're signed up for that. Any questions about all that, or about assignments in general? Catching up on grading as usual, but I have some free space tomorrow, and hopefully that will accomplish great things for me and my students. So let's talk about let's see if we can summarize our conclusions about our reading from last week, which is the Papyrus of Ani. So what did you guys make of the Papyrus of Ani? How can we summarize what we get out of this document and what it tells us about the Egyptians? Yes?
The expectations of the gods towards people are very high, and your lifestyle has to be a specific way. And also there's a lot of emphasis on purity. Like Ani, he had mentioned many times that, I'm pure, 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 to pass the 42 deities.
And so that level of expectation of purity and that high level of standard, it almost seems like it might be too high, maybe? So what is that about? What do you think that is suggesting about about this process, about what it means to go through this? Why is our individual here, who is going through the process of death, having to measure up to something so high? Yeah.
Is it because when he dies, he goes to live with the gods? So if he wants to live amongst them, he has to live up to their standards and stuff like that, their expectations?
I think that's part of it. That the standard is literally impossible for the mortal, and so what you're doing is acknowledging that difference and undergoing a transition that allows you to leave behind the things about the mortal world that are imperfect and pass into the divine realm. What else? What else stood out to you about this? Yeah.
Could it be an emphasis on being different than other people? Because, we're reading this now, but maybe these specific requirements were to further emphasize the distinctness of Egyptian culture rather than towards outside people.
Compared to non-Egyptians, right? And from what we were looking at in our other readings too, it might even be within Egypt. Remember that Egypt is a unified culture, but it has a lot of localized elements. So there's something distinctive about this that says, I am an Egyptian. This is what is expected of me, not just because my gods are perfect, but also because we are Egyptian. Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to answer your question. Each Egyptian would have customized their scroll or their book of the dead to better suit themselves. If I don't want to brag, but I put a video up for if everybody wanted to watch. They would have customized their Book of the Dead.
And this is what we're actually looking at here is an image from this specific Book of the Dead, which is depicting the final scene involving the weighing of Ani's heart, and we have various attendants. So the other thing that is kind of striking about this is one person that's going through the process of death, but so many of the gods are involved. And so why would so many different gods be concerned with, bother with? Yeah?
To maintain an equilibrium.
Say again?
To maintain an equilibrium, like everything gets to be in order.
Right, and that extends to the collective sense of who they are as a community. The gods are responsible for maintaining ma'at, maintaining this balance, this equilibrium through the whole of Egypt. And so each soul is a part of that balance, both within the mortal world and in the field of rushes. What else? Anything else jump out at you guys that was striking or interesting about the process of going through this? Yeah.
This reading spectacular, I kind of view it as like a code of morality for ancient Egyptians to follow, because they got all these rules. It's literally like 50 lines of different things you should or should not do, and I feel like it sort of just acts like a I wouldn't say it's the law, but it's just something that you should refer to, like as a human being, you should like follow.
Although it's interesting that the subtext is that Ani is not pure, and that this is a litany of things that he is telling all of these individual gods. Right? He's saying, he meets the god of parking tickets and says, I've never had a parking ticket, I honor you completely. And, meanwhile, the backseat of his car is, full of summonses. So, maybe that tells us something too. What is that, because this came up in the online discussion. So what does that potentially suggest to us? If we're looking at this process of talking about purity in ways that involve not necessarily, this is not about confession, right? So if it's not about confession, and we have to assume that Ani is not totally pure, so what is it about then? Meeting all of these minor gods on the way to the encounter with Osiris. What does that suggest to us? That there's a meaning to the process. Yeah?
Maybe Ani wants the other gods to support him or her,
Mm-hmm.
so they can convince Osiris.
This is part of it, right? He's getting sort of testimonials. He's passing through these door wardens on the way to... You can't get to Osiris until you've gone through this process. And the process itself is meaningful for the soul. And the process involves recognizing and appeasing these individual gods. These minor gods need to be placated so that you can move on to what matters, which is the actual balancing the soul that takes place before Osiris and Anubis and so forth. So the minor gods even though the Osiris dominates the world of the dead, and Horus dominates the world of the living, all of these minor gods are subordinate and separate, but part of a larger process. And we've seen this from the beginning of the course. This idea of the divine world that is not just a collection of gods, but a system. And this system involves proving yourself through the hero's journey so that you can come before Osiris. How many people were thinking of Moon Knight and having your soul way before a hippopotamus lady?
My favorite Marvel series. Not gonna lie.
It's difficult to avoid that, but anyway. Anything else about the Papyrus of Ani that anyone wants to bring up? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, continue our discussion from last week, because I didn't get to everything I wanted to talk about last week. Let's talk a little bit about cosmology and history. So, the big thing that came up in this reading was a discussion of different kinds of creation myths. And it actually fits in kind of nicely with this week's reading, because this week's reading was also talking about similar kinds of ideas and rituals that are present in different cultures. We have a lot of different versions of creation myths across the ancient world. What kinds of things come up in creation myths? What kinds of things do you guys remember from the discussion of different kinds of creation myths? Yeah.
Usually some sort of conflict.
There's usually some kind of conflict. What kind of?
It's like a good versus evil kind of thing, where and it usually leads to the creation of the world. Like the Greeks, like Zeus and I guess his compatriots cast down Hades and made the underworld as a place for them to live.
And before that, he has to defeat his own father Cronos. And yes, and Marduk, the great god of Babylon, has to destroy his own mother. We talked before about the Zoroastrians and how Zoroastrianism starts out with a conflict between Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. So why would a creation myth involve a primeval conflict? Why do you think that the story about the creation of the world would require it to start with a battle between two opposing forces? Yeah.
Because maybe just in nature you see those opposing forces, like with the sun and the moon, light and dark, day and night, that kind of. It's a justification for what you already see.
Right, so nature's full of dichotomies, nature's full of contrasts, and this is a description of the natural world, the origin of the natural world. That is definitely a part of it. What else can we think of as to why? Think about the result of a conflict like this, right? The purpose of this conflict, yeah.
Could it like also explain why there's things like mountains? Because only a battle between like gods could create some of the features that they see around, like big ravines and stuff like that.
Right, so everything about nature is larger than life, beyond human capacity. It needs an explanation, and some of them seem to be best explained by production of violence, or deprivation. Like the desert might be explained by the taking away of water through the vindictiveness of one god against another, that kind of thing. That's definitely possible. What else? You haven't read my mind yet, so I'm waiting for that for the answer that I'm thinking of. Why would creation myth require a primeval battle? The result of this battle, you're starting to talk about this a little bit before, the result of this battle is the creation, not just of the world, but of order. The creation of order out of disorder. That is the primary element of a lot of these creation myths. Creation myths are there partly to explain not just the world, but the orderliness of the world. And the orderliness that humans are able to create as a subset of that world. That humans rely upon in order to be strong and prosperous. So these are order creation myths as much as anything. Now, there are a couple of interesting exceptions to this. One is Egypt. Egypt does not begin with, Egypt's creation myth does not begin with a conflict between primeval forces. Why not? What's special about the gods of Egypt? What is it that's different about the perception of the gods of Egypt compared to other people's perception of their gods? Yeah.
The Nile floods a lot more commonly than places like the Tigris and Euphrates, so I guess they could see their gods as being less wrathful or violent.
Right. The gods of Egypt are understood from the outset to be benevolent and nurturing, and the establishing principle, the fundamental nature of the gods is equilibrium, balance, order, ma'at. So the Egyptian gods just, create the world, and it's already ordered because that's in the nature of their divinity, which suggests something interesting about that divine system. Each god has its own intentions, and the origin of the process is the potency of natural forces that can be at odds with each other. So Egypt is one exception to the primeval conflict. The other is Israel. Right? So if you look at the story of creation in Genesis, it just says, Yahweh is walking around one day and he said, you know what, let there be light. And there was light and it was good. And then he creates the world, and then he creates animals, and then he creates Adam, and then he gives him somebody to sleep with, and it's all very systematic. And any nemesis comes along after the fact. So, what does that tell us? Why might the Israeli story, the Judeo-Israeli story, not involve conflict? Yes.
Because if there's one supreme deity, then I guess there wouldn't be another opportunity for something to go against them if he's the only creator.
Right. It's deliberately tailored to emphasize the monotheism of the Jews, in particular, as they are writing these creation stories in retrospect during the Babylonian captivity to isolate their culture and ethnicity and to prevent assimilation by setting themselves apart as different. And so they emphasize the nature of their origin as being special to them and deliberately reject. Remember, we talked about how a lot of Israeli Judean elements of the Israeli Judean religion are inherited from the Syrian and Canaanite religious forms, and how a lot of the story of El, the Canaanite god, the king of the gods, becomes focused in the god that becomes Yahweh. The Israelis and the Jews inherit a lot of these elements of Canaanite culture. When they sit down to write their origin story and their creation myth, late in their history, in a time of great difficulty for them, they specifically reject the primeval conflict because it would minimize the preeminence of the single God. Anything else you can say about creation myths that stand out to you guys? I know that the reading was giving a lot of different examples. Yeah.
I find it interesting that for each of the 42 gods, there's a trait that goes with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like the god of killing people, the god of deceit, the god of abuse, the god of terrifying people. Like there's so many different gods. Because when he's saying his confession,
Mm-hmm.
he's just saying to every god, like, I have not done this, I have not robbed, I have not done this.
Right. The nature of the way the Egyptians think about their origin and their pantheon is in very specific terms, and a lot of times creation stories in general end up with sort of generic forces that then, once order is established, allow for the development of more focused, lower level gods. It's not until Zeus defeats Kronos, his father, and establishes order that it becomes possible for the whole array of Olympian gods that Zeus brings forth, and the specialization, you call it, of the divine. So that has to come with order. The other thing that struck me as very interesting is that creation myths tend to be local. So as you are looking at the stories of creation, it's not just within particular cultures, but it's at the level of individual cities. And again, we've seen this for the, remember how we were talking about the Syrian Canaanite gods and how each city-state has its own subset of the pantheon. And, it favors one particular god. Likewise, the creation myths, each city-state has its own version of how life originated, how order originated, and, the god that's in charge of that city-state will play the major role. In Egypt, if you look at Heliopolis, the major mover in creation is Atum. But if you go down the Nile to Thebes, the major player in creation is Amun. The creation stories are local, which suggests to us what, maybe? What might that suggest to us? Why would it be significant that creation stories are local, that each community has its own version of the creation story?
Could it have something to do with identity? Trying to be...
I think it could. And you're only saying that because you've had me a few times, and I always talk about identity. But it's true. The formation of a particular story, the tailoring of mythology to a community, is a means of asserting distinctive identity. There are a number of different ways in which creation can come about, and we can amuse ourselves in talking about how how creation can come about through the bodily fluids of a particular divinity, and doesn't have to be semen. It could be spit. It could be blood. It could be, but sometimes it's semen. Or, as with Genesis, invocation. Let there be light. There's also an interesting possibility where you have a craft god, like a god who's presented as a potter or a blacksmith who has the responsibility of creating the world, and then somebody else asserts order over it. I mentioned this before. This is called the demiurge. The demiurge is somebody who creates the world through craft. So, the other thing that cropped up as we were looking at this is that it's not consistent across cultures. One of the things that varies across cultures is who creates who. So, in your primeval conflict, the victor has to create the world in order to impose order over it, normally speaking. So, for example, the prototype of this is Marduk has to destroy his mothers. His parents were forces of chaos, And the younger gods rise up against them and kill the father, and the mother starts slaughtering the younger gods, and Marduk, the hero god, rises up and destroys his mother, which is why for the Babylonians Marduk is preeminent, and he has to use the carcass of his mother in order to form the lands and firmaments. So that's what we're living on right now, if you're Babylonian. We're living on Marduk's mom's dead body. And that's the thing you'll remember from this course, is me saying that for the next 20 years. When there's no conflict, you're more likely to have demiurge, somebody who's crafting the world. Or the earth and the heavens are primeval, and they end up creating the gods. Yeah.
I was just wondering, like when you were saying that the conflict sort of reflects the social world, is it that the Babylonians and Hittites have kind of military hierarchies running them to begin with, and that the creation that kind of justifies that military rule, or is it more indirect than that?
I think it's not necessarily about military so much as potency. And so the problem is in the origin, you have the raw potency of natures. Religion is invented in order to impose order upon the chaos and destructive nature of the forces of the wild. So, what we have at the beginning is untamed forces. And something has to be strong enough to defeat those. So when we have primeval battles, it's that the titans have to be overcome by a hero god that is potent and a force of order, and that god is able. So Zeus for the early Greeks, Marduk for the Babylonians. Marduk is strong enough to impose order. Ahura Mazda is strong enough to provide order, but in his world is bound. So it can be used as an analogy for mortal military types, but it's evocative of the power of nature to destroy humanity, and something setting that at bay. What is it? Okay.
So were the Egyptians, did they believe in a demiurge? Because it's saying the Hebrews and the Egyptians believed in a demiurge, but I thought you were saying that they believed in invocation.
Right. So in this particular case, this is a form of demiurge that is working through invocation. So a demiurge doesn't have to be a crafty.
Oh, okay.
It's somebody who creates the universe through their ability. Normally that's a crafty kind of thing, but Judaism is always a special case anyway. But yeah, that's a good point. So what is the cosmos anyway? We're talking about cosmology. What is the cosmos? It's a television show. Neil deGrasse Tyson. Yes.
It's like it's a process. For the Egyptians, at least it's not the space. But is this in the context of the Egyptians?
This is just in general. You're right to remember that the Egyptians see it as a process.
Okay.
More generally,
That's what the gods did.
That's part of it. But if you're talking about the cosmos, what you're really talking about is everything, right? The cosmology is the effort to explain everything. And so what you actually have is a tripartite division of the cosmos. In almost every ancient society, they will see the world, they see the cosmos as consisting of the world of mortals and a space in the heavens and a space below. Now the interesting thing is that with afterlife, the discussion of the heavens and the underworld, or the elsewheres, is half in terms of where we situate the gods in our minds, and it's not necessarily all heaven. Remember that, so for example, the Egyptian gods, Osiris is in the netherworld, and Ani is meeting all of these divinities on the way to Osiris. So these are these minor gods might potentially be able to exist in heaven or the other world, but the gods are not necessarily just in heaven, is what I'm saying. We know about Zeus and Hades. Hades is tooling around in the netherworld, while the other gods are on Olympus. Usually the netherworld and the heavens are both part of the divine world. So what happens when mortals die? If you're looking at the afterlife, some go to, in some cultures, you can go to either the heavens or the netherworld. And in other cultures, your only option is the netherworld. Because, yeah.
Oh, no, you can finish that first. I just want to ask, for the Greeks, the netherworld, would Elysium, their heaven, be the netherworld?
Elysium is the heaven part of the afterlife. And so Elysium felt relatively late in Greek mythology. Originally, the Greeks just have Hades, which they describe as a place of no joy. And later on, as philosophy develops and the Greeks become more concerned with positive actions as motivators of society, then they start to talk about Elysium as an alternative. But they don't have that early on.
Yeah, because as a kid, which got me into mythology first, I read the Percy Jackson series, which taught me about Elysium, and that Persephone, the queen of the underworld, would rule over that. Mm-hmm. And it would be a part of the underworld.
Yeah, it's a because it develops late. It's given a sort of a distinctive set of characteristics that sort of make it a version of the underworld as it had already been understood for centuries. So, and then the Percy Jackson books modify what the different stories of mythology tell in order to world build for him. So, but the thing about the afterlife then is what might condition. Why would you have a culture where some cultures where you only go to the netherworld and experience nothing, and other cultures where you end up having a choice, or you end up having a choice made for you about which one you go to. Remember when we were looking at the Epic of Gilgamesh, the people of Sumer think about the afterlife solely in terms of the house of dust, a place where everybody is unable to act or do anything, and they're miserable because they are impotent, because they are unable to accomplish anything.
Is it due to the way they see their gods? So like the Mesopotamians who thought their gods were always deceitful and cruel and not always out for their best interests, they would assume that they wouldn't have a place like a heaven to go to. They just all go to another world. While something like Egypt, whose gods are looking out for them, they'd expect them to give them an opportunity to join them.
Well, and also for the Egyptians, everything is about balance. So they would expect there to be, a balance of options for the afterlife as a means of balancing nature. For the Mesopotamians, for the Sumerians, you know, the capriciousness of the gods produces a side effect, which is when you can't count on the gods, when the gods have their own agenda and they end up doing their own thing, you can't count on the gods. What does that mean? That means that you have to count on yourself. The meaning of life is accomplishing things while you're alive. And death becomes extraneous. You can't do anything after death. You can't accomplish anything. And, you know, it's not important to dwell amongst the gods. And so the afterlife becomes a place of insignificance and impotence. The other thing that came up when looking at the cosmology is how the Hellenistic Greeks, the later Greeks, start to develop this discussion of multiple heavens. And so you have these concentric spheres that, with the Earth at the center, this geocentric nested sphere model with all of these heavens, which has an interesting side effect. It places the Earth lowest and least significant. It's at the center, but because it's lowest and there are all of these heavens that are of greater and greater moment, this shifts the center of gravity of the cosmos, as it were, and emphasizes the ideal nature of the heavens and the aspiration to be amongst them. This is what brings the Greeks around to developing a positive afterlife in the Elysian fields, because they're developing a more complex story of the heavens that diminishes the earth and the underworld. So this tripartite thing does not have to be balanced. What it does, though, is it's still about a mortal world and a divine world, and death becomes a means of transitioning from one to the other. So, what does cosmology have to do with the ordering of time and history? We talked a little bit more about how the gods become involved in shaping history as a means of placing, enemies and hostile forces on the wrong side of the gods. But there's also something about how the story of humanity is told in cosmological terms, starting out with a creation myth that provides order, and then giving an arc to the entire story of humanity to the world in general, but especially to humanity. And this story has a beginning and a middle and the end. And once you start thinking in those terms, you start talking about what it is that recurs within this and what it is that progresses within this. This is where we get our visions of the epic scale of humanity that is present in Hesiod, for example. Hesiod writes about all of these ages of humanity, the golden age and the silver age and so forth, and how the story of humanity is a progression, not necessarily a positive one. Hesiod was very negative about the age that he happened to be living in and wished he had been born in another one. The Etruscans had periods of time that were connected to the duration of lifespans, and the Romans picked this up, developed a a concept called the cycone, which is essentially periods of history that are marked by, the death of anybody who was present at the beginning. And it's understood that humanity only has a finite number of these periods. Anybody who starts talking in terms of these progressions ends up suggesting, that this is aiming toward an end. And what do we tend to get at the end? What do we tend to get at the end of a story like this? Yeah.
Cataclysm?
A cataclysm, potentially, not necessarily. Right? Why would you have a cataclysm?
To signify like a literal end, like as a way, it's like just a tool that destroys humanity, the explanation.
Right. So there's in some versions of this you have an ending that results in simply an eternal kingship. That is a beginning of a period of total peace and order. This is the bookends to the creation of order. This is the implementation of total order, peace, and stability. After all these periods of humanity have developed in this direction. What you're talking about is a subset of this called the apocalypse. You tend to get apocalypses in monotheistic religions. You tend to get an apocalypse in a religion where you're told what to believe, where you're told to believe that a certain set of articles of faith are correct and the rest of them are wrong. Because an apocalypse is the required destruction of all of those who don't meet the criteria, and establishing a universal peace afterwards. So Cosmos then takes into account not just the spatial aspect, the totality of everything in terms of above, between, and below. But Cosmos also takes into the chronological aspect, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And the way that people tell this story is the way that they see themselves in relation to the natural world and in relation to other cultures. It's a means of reinforcing their take on what it means to be civilized and how they're different from everyone else. So, or for order, read civilization, read us. Whoever us is. All right, let's talk about the Minoans. We don't know a lot about the Minoans. Why not?
We can't decipher their language.
We can't decipher their writing system, but also their language. We can't decipher their writing system, which means that we are left to images. We don't even know what the Minoans called themselves. Minoans is a name that was imposed upon them by modern archaeologists, referencing Greek mythology. We have what's left behind of their culture, and we have their imagery. And so this is various forms of imagery. We have pottery decoration. There's always pottery decoration because ceramics don't rot. And so the pottery gets left behind. So we have pottery. We have wall paintings in the cities of the Minoans that have been excavated, and we have these weird signet rings, which is mainly what you're going to be looking at in the primary source for this week. So, just as an exercise, what does this image tell you about the Minoans, do you think? If you look at this image, what might this suggest to you Yeah.
They're either seafarers or eat a lot of seafood.
They have a strong connection to the sea, which we can definitely understand and confirm. What else? Yeah.
It's an octopus?
Right, an octopus or yeah. So yeah.
So I could be wrong, but I'm guessing they consider an octopus to be a god, because like you said, considering they're like surrounded by water, they just figured, maybe that's a god of their own.
So yeah.
They were already advanced in like arts and molding of materials.
Right, so this is a good point too, that they are advanced in terms of artistic representation, and they are interested in representing things that are important to them in their art, and this includes, this sea creature. Now, what you've said is a very interesting suggestion, because this is our tendency in looking at ancient cultures to see images that are in a certain, that reflect certain kinds of things, and ask ourselves, well, maybe is that a god? Is that something that they understood to be a god? Why did you think that this was? What would support the idea of this being a god potentially? What made you think that this was a god?
I guess, because the 8 tentacles, I guess it's just something obviously no one's ever seen before, the octopus, so I guess they were just, what I'm looking for, I guess they were just astonished by it, so.
Right, they're marveling at it, they're wowed by its power and potency, yeah.
I kind of feel like in relation to, I think, some Hinduism type stuff. Some of their gods have multiple arms.
Yeah, that's definitely possible, yeah.
But couldn't it be something as simple as they were just recording the animals that they seen around them?
Or this is purely an effort to realistically portray the characters of the world around them. Yes.
Octopus has like 3 wings and 4 hats, right?
Well, I don't know if they knew the biology of it that extensively.
They put you some type of ink.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's why they kind of related it to.
Right, they would see in this, something that is inhuman, something that is powerful. Yeah.
I was gonna say that. About the octopus, I was gonna say that. If someone found like one of my coffee mugs in 1,000 years and saw a picture of my dog on it, I think it'd be incorrect for them to assume that I worship dogs and stuff. Like this could be, if this is just used to store wine or olive oil, or maybe like some fish sauce, maybe it was made out of octopus.
It could be purely decorative, or it could be descriptive. In this jar we put octopus guts, or something like that. Yeah.
It just could be imaginary thing. They just drew it.
Right. It could be just a story.
Yeah.
And so this is our problem, right? We don't know. What we can infer from this is there's an effort to demonstrate the potency of this creature, which suggests to us that they're interested in portraying the potency of nature. The gods come from the potency of nature, but that does not mean that this is a god. It means that it's reflective of how the Minoans respect the power of nature and want to tell stories about it. Yeah.
And just that person's seen an octopus. Like it's not like you'll see depictions of rhinoceroses with somebody who's never seen a rhinoceros, and you can kind of get that it's got a this is somebody who's clearly experienced an octopus.
Right. Or has seen, the imagery of the octopus is prevalent enough in Minoan culture, that it's been a long time since I've actually seen a horse, for example, and so I would be relying upon imagery of horses from American culture if I were required to draw one. So this could suggest to us, the level of detail could suggest to us that this is a prevalent motif. But we can't go so far without additional evidence as saying that it's religious. It's culturally, the potency of it as a natural force is culturally relevant. And that is related to religion. But that's probably as far as we can go. as we said, the writing system of the Minoans is undeciphered, which means that any literature that we do have from them is opaque to us, and relatively little of it has come to us anyway, because the Minoan civilization was absorbed and subsumed by the Mycenaean Greeks, who we'll be talking about next week. So, next week's topic will subsume this week's in order of chronological progression, very appropriate. And then the Mycenaean Greek culture collapsed and was destroyed. And so, a lot of material from the Bronze Age Crete would not have come down to us anyway. What we do have is excavation and the reading. The reading on the Minoans this week I know is very thin. It didn't give you a lot of detail, but it mentioned that it was a palace culture. What that means is that the economic focus of the Minoans was large industrial complexes that were controlled by the king. And so within a complex like this, everything was under control, and all of the production and manufacture and the making of finished goods and the dealing with agricultural produce, all this was the entire economic focus. And everything was centered in here. The Minoan cities were thriving centers of industry. And there are no temples within the palace city. Instead, we have imagery that requires interpretation. So this is another thing that comes up a lot in talking about the Minoans. We have a number of images like this that are about what we call bull leaping, but we have no context. We just have the image. So what does this suggest to you as you look at this? What do you think it might be going on in an image like this? It might give us some insight into Minoans, yes.
It might have been like a form of entertainment.
It might, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, similar to how some ancient culture would have like arenas. They would like the gladiators would fight each other. This might have just been an activity that people watch. Right.
This could be a spectator sport. Yes, much like the gladiators or the way that the Romans would have animals fighting humans in the arena, this kind of thing. It seems to be depicted with a certain amount of vibrancy, a certain amount of positiveness, which might be suggestive that this is something that is important, that's something that's seen as positive or celebratory. What else? Yeah.
A coming of age ceremony.
It could possibly be a coming-of-age story, in that, nobles of a certain age are expected to go into the ring and prove their valor and level-headedness by engaging in bull leaping. What else? If this had religious content, what might it suggest? Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of astrology a little bit.
How so?
Because the Taurus being in relation to the bull, but I don't know if they had that many advancements to read stars and stuff like that, but that's what it reminded me of when I saw it.
Right, so the presence of the bull here is very evocative of, again, the potency of the natural world. On land, the bull is usually seen as representing the power of nature. Yeah.
I was going to say that like bulls are known to be unpredictable and pretty violent, so to
Right.
have a human, if this is a religious painting or motif, having a human leaping over it and conquering it kind of shows how humans can kind of conquer that disorder of the natural world and stuff.
Right, so this could be a mythological story that involves the imposing of order on forces of chaos, sort of like a creation myth. And, it's then acted out as ritual or as sport. Remember the book was talking about how in mythology something irrevocable, like the destruction of chaos, is made symbolic and momentary in ritual. So potentially this could be something like that, but again, we don't know. We have lots of images of bull leaping from all over, including a signet ring that shows the same thing going on, and this is all we can say about it. That we do know that the horns of a bull are used to identify sacred locations for the Minoans. Not necessarily because the bull was revered as a god, but because the bull represents the potency of nature that the gods control. Again, remember the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Ishtar sends down the bull of heaven. The bull of heaven is not an actual god. It's a manifestation of the potency of nature. And Gilgamesh demonstrates the ability of mortals to control that potency, that chaos, and impose human order on things. So there might be some resonance there. The bull motif shows up in a lot of different ways in borderline religious aspects for the Minoans. So, for example, we have these votives, these religious gifts of miniature bulls that we see as left behind with shrines and this kind of thing, without much explanation. Yeah.
Yes. Question: the Minoans lived on the Greek island of Crete, correct?
The Minoans lived on the Greek island of Crete. That's right. During the Bronze Age.
The story of the Minotaur. This whole obsession with bulls might have affected that.
Yes, exactly. The theory is that the Minoans were known to be focused upon the bull as an emblem of their society, or the emblem of their relationship with the force of the divine, or whatever. And so the bull is identified with the Minoans when the Greeks come along. The Greeks come along, they start telling stories about the Minoans, and the bull figures prominently in them, and that leads to the story of the labyrinth and the Minotaur and King Minos, which is why we call them the Minoans. The name comes from that myth that originates with the Greeks talking about the Minoans. We don't have any of the Minoan myths themselves. So I mentioned there's no temples in the palace cities. And so what we have instead is peak sanctuaries and other sacred places that are in the heart of nature. What this suggests to us is that the Minoans tended to situate the divine in the center of the natural world as a contrast to the order and civilization and productivity, human productivity of the cities. So this is very interesting. To me, it feels like the Minoans, want to keep the city for themselves, and they can do all their industrial production, they make all their bronze goods and accomplish all these things within the city, and then they go out of the city into the heart of nature, the tops of mountains, the centers of forests, into the deeps of caves, and commune with the divine there, and then come home and start making money again. This seems to me to be, and this is just my personal interpretation, there seems to me a dichotomy between the world of mortals and the world of the divine that's kept physically separate. And this is an important contrast to every other ancient culture that we've looked at, every other ancient culture we've looked at, where is the temple of the chief god? In the center of the city. The chief god is in the center of the city. And they build a temple which is where the god lives. And the god is expected to live there amongst the mortals and share his or her benevolence and be a part of the prosperity and strength of the city. The Minoans keep the city for mortals, and the divine is outside, in the heart of nature. So this emphasizes the connection between the raw potency of nature and the gods, but it also suggests something about Minoan culture that we can't confirm because we don't have their mythology, theology, or anything like that. So we have some images of figures that seem to suggest more connection to nature on the part of the gods. This figurine is usually assumed to be a goddess simply because she's depicted with animals and in this very characteristic dress, which we also see all over the signet impressions. These images tend to show a very particular kind of image, bare-breasted and wearing these layered skirts. And what exactly that signifies, we're not sure. So, for example, here we have a figure that seems to be elevated, and then there are figures around the figure that are lower down. And I don't know how well you can see this, but what does this image suggest anything to you guys? Yeah.
I can see on the left their arms are raised as if they're bowing.
Right, or in some sort of celebration. You know, this is definitely this seems to be some sort of religious gesture or dance or celebratory movement or something like this, and you know, this kind of thing is very characteristic. You see this on a lot of these images. This kind of movement and dance. What else? Anything else you guys see when you're looking at this? Yeah.
There are a lot of plants, so representing nature.
There's a lot of plants, and they might be particular plants that are part of this ceremony. So, you know, this might be descriptive of like a bacchanalia kind of ceremony that involves the partaking of certain substances. That's not necessarily out of left field. The story of the oracle at Delphi, which I'll talk more about next week, involves a priestess whose job is to give oracles. And she gives oracles by inhaling the fumes of a hallucinogenic substance. So there's some speculation that these plants are significant in that way. Anything else that jumps out at us as we look at this image? This is the kind of thing that you'll be looking at in the primary source for this week. Do you think there's any significance to the way these bodies are depicted? The way that the individuals are presented? I mean, probably there is, but you know, do you have any ideas about what that might signify? Again, it's a little bit, yeah.
Sorry for saying this.
Sorry?
Their body structure looks like kind of ants. An ant.
An ant? Oh yeah, so it's very segmented, right? It's there seems to be something significant about this sort of separation of the legs and the torso. That's interesting.
They don't have heads that I can see.
And the heads seem to be, you know, seem to be missing or de-emphasized. And a number of these images are more about the legs, and then the torso and the head in that order, even when we're looking at male individuals. So think about these images and what they might suggest. Think about whether it seems plausible to you that these suggest, religious iconography, whether the central figures, whether, somebody being elevated like this is reasonable to assume that that figure is divine in nature, as somebody have talked about. It's on the basis of images like this that Sir Arthur Evans suggested that the Minoans were matriarchal and worshipped a great mother goddess. And that theory has since been debunked. It's no longer the primary way of looking at the Minoans. But the way that the Minoans emphasize the female form, the way that they place divinity in the heart of nature, suggests the preeminence of a earth goddess, of a mother earth goddess, in whatever pantheon they have. It's just that pantheon involves both, male and female figures. And so, don't be afraid to speculate and go off the wall. When there's not a lot of information, sometimes it's useful to have a whole bunch of theories and see what makes sense. So that's the reading for this week. And in concert with this, we can talk a little bit about rituals and cultures, because the way that the imagery of the Minoans speaks to us, suggests an element of ritual. And the presence of the peak cultures and the other sacred places in the heart of nature suggests a particular kind of ritual that is talked about in this reading, the procession. So the main thing that we were looking at in terms of the reading about rituals is, there's a bunch there's a bunch of rituals that we can situate in different cultures, and some of them seem to have migrated. So, given that local communities' understanding of their gods is tied to their identity, tied to their culture, is very specific to them, how can we have the migration of ritual from one culture to another? If the understanding of the gods and the way that your community relates to the gods is very distinctive and very personal to your community, very idiosyncratic, very tied to your identity, how can we have migration of ritual from one culture to another? Yeah.
Is it because a lot of these creation myths have similar ideas, so it's easier to integrate? Because I remember we were talking about before how it was easier in the ancient world to spread ideas simply because these gods represented similar experiences.
Right, so you can recognize affinities between your thunder god and their thunder god, and so therefore that makes the ritual more portable. Yeah.
I was gonna say basically that since all the many gods had different attributes and traits to them, but only different with their aims, that maybe one culture could convince another culture that our two rituals do the same thing, they're just practiced differently, so might as well do ours.
They do the same thing because, yes.
One example of that, the scapegoat ritual from the book, from the reading. They would take the diseased or polluted aspect, for example, a goat or a human, and cast them off. That would be a shared ritual between civilizations.
Right, but it's adapted specifically to the culture so each version of the scapegoat ritual is different in each culture.
Yes.
The ritual, in other words, is a tool that is adapted and shaped to the culture that adopts it. The ritual is simply a tool. It doesn't have religious content of its own. It's a means of interacting with the divine system from the human world. So we have the migration of rituals across cultures, and the way that this happens is through cultural overlap and affinities between similar deities, this kind of thing. Our ability to understand these things is inhibited by our emphasis on understanding each individual culture. There isn't enough cross-cultural studies in the ancient world because we're so focused on getting the documents translated and honing our understanding. Everybody focuses on the one culture that they're interested in. We don't get cross-disciplinary study enough of the ancient world. Some of the records are prescriptive, tell you how to think of the rituals rather than what the rituals perform. We have a lack of text from some cultures, and most of all, I think the thing that gets most overlooked is information we have tends to be about the public space. The information that we have tends to be about the public space, and a lot of rituals are private. We simply don't know about them. And we'll never know because, even if we get a DeLorean, we won't be able to go into everybody's houses and steal their secrets. All right, so my next question was, what is a scapegoat ritual? And you already answered that. Scapegoat ritual involves taking an animal or sometimes another expendable part of the culture. So sometimes it's a slave, sometimes it's a woman, but usually it's an animal, and burdening that animal with whatever needs to be removed from the community. So some kind of contamination, either pestilence or religious pollution, is transferred from the community to this animal, and then the animal is sent out. This is what the word escape. The etymology of the word escape actually refers to send out, to hurl out. And this leaves your community purified. So there are some interesting differences in the various versions of the ritual. The main thing that's interesting, so for example, the Hebrew version has 2 goats.
That was a chicken.
It's usually depicted as a goat, but the Hebrew version has 2 goats, one of which is burdened with the pollution of the community and ejected, so the community is purified, and the other is sacrificed to Yahweh. Most of the other versions of the scapegoat ritual just have the one animal that is sent out. So even the participation of the animals involved and who's conducting the ceremony, all these things vary. All that matters is that this is a means of ejecting pollution out.
So do modern Jewish people use chickens?
I don't know.
Someone told me that they knew in Orthodox Jewish families they would sacrifice chickens.
It might be. The idea is to choose a minor animal. So which animal it is might vary according to time and place. The story that's in Leviticus, if I remember correctly, uses 2 actual goats. But you know, the ritual is adaptable, which is part of the whole point, I guess. This is also a way of defining a community as a not us. So part of the purpose of the scapegoat ritual is to shore up a community sense of who they are by ejecting the unwanted. So the old year, new year thing also involves a lot of continuity in terms of things that we see over and over. In particular, we see reversals. So we see masters serving their slaves, and a criminal king, and the unchaining of a god, and so forth. Why do we see reversals at the new year? Why would this be an element of celebrating the end of one year and the beginning of the other? We'll talk about that and then I'll let you go. No thoughts on that? No, you're just ready for me to let you go, right? This is worth thinking about, but let me suggest to you that there is a chaos and order element here as well. This is a miniature creation myth. This is creating a moment of chaos so that it can be ended, so that order can be imposed, and the new year begins with stability and solidity. It also confines the chaos, any chaos and woes of the past year, to that year. The Romans had a great ritual that involved, at the end of every year, they would take an iron nail and drive it into the wall of the Temple of Juno. And this was meant to fix under that nail all the negative things, all the calamities of the previous year. It's fixed in place by that nail and is stuck there forever. All the calamities are confined to there, and the new year can begin clean and solid and fresh. And so we see these rituals and these images and the mythology. All this is telling us one thing: the mythology and the ritual, what they have in common, is that they are tools. They are tools. Stories can be spread and rituals can be migrated. The fundamental fact is that in each community there are tools for communing with their version of the divine. All right, I will leave you there. Have a good week, and make sure to participate in the online discussion. Give me your thoughts on the Minoan imagery. Make sure to take the quiz. And remember, I have the slides posted on the website, so you can go and take a look at the slides. I will see you next week.